I'd like to invite you now to invite you all for an open discussion. Questions, comments?
Hi, this is sort of a joke, but it also might be helpful. This is about the video concept. So one of the things I've found in explaining to people what's happening is that you need to explain that change takes time, and everybody feels like they invented the thing that's successful when you get to the end. And also many things you think have failed turn out to be winners. So an example that illustrates that is the progress from the Apple Newton to the
Palm
Pilot to the iPhone, which were 1987, 97, and 2007. And I think if you look at the smartphone, we accepted that because it was a phone and we knew we needed to make calls, but now no one actually makes voice calls. So it could be like the video is the voice call of the future digital education.
Metaphors and analogies. We had a pre-symposium workshop yesterday. Some of you were there. And Barbara Oakley was telling us about the power of metaphors and analogies. Any other commentary for questions from the audience? We would like to invite you to now share openly, or if the panelists want to comment on each other's statements.
I'll throw one provocative thing out there that you encourage us to think about what's different, hopefully better, about scale, which is one aspect of this. But there's another aspect, and I think some of the earlier presentations by other panelists, there's the online aspect, which has benefits of its own, especially when combined with scale. So you heard Carolyn Rosé talk a little about the experiments they've been doing to essentially mix up student discussion groups based on analyzing the discourse of the original group and what makes the group successful. If you think, discussion groups have been used in brick and mortar classrooms forever, but it'd be really hard to do that work in a brick and mortar classroom. It's because the students are virtual and they're online that you can do things like that. And my colleague Marty Hurst and I at Berkeley have done similar work. Carlos briefly alluded to Mentiv, a company that I'm involved with. We're gonna bring the TA discussion group model to online courses. And we can only do that because the students don't have to be in the same place. They'll have to be there at the same time, but video conferencing is now good enough that we can start to try to bring some of those benefits back into the online world. So, by the way, I'll pay you later, Carlos, for the mention. Thank you. But I think another topic we might talk about is the online aspect is interesting. We needed to do the online part in order to handle the scale, but let's not forget that the online part is still an ingredient. We could also use that to do things that would not have been possible in a pure physical setting.
In this session about pedagogy, one of the things that I'm seeing is the evolution of the MOOC from a course with a start and a fixed start time to maybe a series of modules where we consider each completed module a success rather than each person who doesn't complete everything a dropout, and where we understand this learner agency and that today's learner is empowered, and all the things we're trying to move learners toward, many learners already are. So maybe the panel can talk about sort of, do you see a future in which a MOOC isn't a single linear pathway where there are it's an invitation to come and learn segments that make sense to different kinds of learners?
And I call it the Chipotleization of education. Because people are, used to be, you went to the restaurant, you went to McDonald's and you got a burger or you got a chicken sandwich, and that was your choice. You got a number one or a number two. And now we've gotten to the point where we get, I want a bowl with white rice, and I want chicken, and I want tomatoes, and I want this, and I want that, and we're getting much more used to being able to get exactly what we need and what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And I think that the badging system and the modularization system that you're starting to see now in higher education is going to be is a trend. I think you're going to see a lot more of that, and it makes sense because just look at this, look at the panels, and look at the people that we've heard from today. When people stand up and talk about what they do, I mean, nobody says I'm a plumber, I'm a mechanic. Now it's, well, I do this at this organization and I do this at that organization. our jobs are unique to us. Our careers are unique to us. We create our careers, and we need skills. So I need to know a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I need to know how to do that. And so, going to school to get a degree in architecture may not anymore be relevant.
Yeah, I agree with your point that even online shopping is really changing people's expectations about buying any product. And educational products will, if you can go Chipotle, I can go Amazon.com. I mean, education products will be out there where somebody's saying, for this job, I need a leadership credential. Show me all the leadership credentials. Now sort them according to time it takes to complete, sort them according to price, sort them according to user ratings. So a badge or a small unit of instruction tied to a learning outcome becomes a place where learners can post comments and employers can post comments, and people can start making informed decisions and assembling that set of credentials over time. I think it has profound implications for everything. All good, in my opinion.
I actually think one of the effects of the modularization is this is a huge structural challenge for traditional universities, by the way. It had never occurred to me to think about what a convenient coincidence that the fundamentals of algorithms, the fundamentals of programming languages, the fundamentals of data structures, all take exactly 14 weeks to impart, right? I mean, as far as I've been able to figure out, the reason we have 2 14-week semesters and the summer off is because when Harvard was founded, that's what they did. And pretty much everybody has followed suit. And at Berkeley, we've actually already started to introduce half-length courses. We have a new data science course where there's a first few weeks where everybody gets a common core of stuff, but then they branch out. The social science folks go one way, the arts folks go another way, the computational biology folks go another way, and they start doing applications that are specific to them. So I think, universities are a little behind the curve on this, but we're starting to realize that, yeah, actually, you don't need an entire course on, databases to become conversant with skills that you want to plug into another area. So I think it's all to the good. And a lot of us are using MOOC modules as supplements to our own courses in just this way.
Let me just say one more thing. I think it's perfectly, what you're talking about is exactly the line that we're trying to follow, and we're actually going in 2 different directions that are more modularization and actually more accumulation toward credit. Some people may know that edX is now partnering with universities to offer credit, and credit is more the consolidation of a bunch of stuff that says, hey, this is creditable, and so I'm going to give you that, and you can use it toward gaining an education on campus or in a traditional university. But I think one of the things that you asked us to consider the things that are really great about making things large. One of the things that's really not great about making things large is actually associating a creditable thing like a badge or credit or any other kind of credential online with a person and being able to validate who that person is. So as we expand into areas of the globe that we don't have immediate familiarity with or associations with, and we try to grant credentials across a huge swath of people in all different kinds of circumstances, we actually find ourselves with a very significant challenge. And even though I would love to be able to satisfy exactly what George was just talking about with these great packages of portable credentials that I can then move around with me and go everywhere and get a job and then go back to school and do that for a couple years and then do something else, be a volunteer, I'm going to have a significant challenge as a MOOC provider providing education at scale, trying to give it to somebody and know that that somebody is who they say they are. And so we definitely have the interest and we definitely have a challenge in front of us, how to do that at scale. It's a great question.
So this is a question for Armando Fox. You mentioned the 200 students taking a Python course where they have feedback, telling them what mistake they've made and showing a map. So last year, Peter Norvig at Google I/O explained that they were doing the same with their MOOC students in Python, but with 100,000 students. So the question to you is whether you see what problems you might see in terms of the difference of scale between initiatives like Google's and yours. And a second part to the question is whether your tool is open source or not.
So let me answer the second part first. Yes, if it comes from Berkeley, it usually is open source. We like to think we helped invent that. Whether it's convenient to use, I make no claim. You have to jiggle it the right way. But in terms of the difference in scale between, suppose we want to give automated aesthetic feedback to 100,000 students instead of a few hundred students. certainly one of the differences, in our view, we're developing this stuff, as I said, primarily for use in our courses. And to the extent we can use them in MOOCs, that's great. But in a 250-person course, you can still have TAs. So we're not relying exclusively on the tool to be, the student plus the automated feedback from the tool will magically result in the student becoming a better programmer. The idea is that the tools are there to amplify the effort that the TAs already have. So, as much as I love this tool and I'm going to deploy it in my own course next semester as well, I don't see it as a replacement for having the TAs who can, the students can take the results to them and say, I understand why this person did better, but what did I miss? What was the concept that if I had known it, I would have produced the result that this person produced? We also were interested in kind of what's the lower bound, right? What's the fewest number of students that you can have to make something like this work well? And that, it turns out to be surprisingly low. It's on the order of a few hundred. So a 250 campus course is actually not large enough, but advantages of scale, what we're doing is we're combining the results from students who are doing this in the MOOC with the students who are doing it in the campus course. So the aggregate data set is now the basis for giving the feedback. So we're trying to explore both ends of it, but I think one of the big challenges from my point of view is if you get to a point where there's no human feedback possible at all, not even human feedback that is amplified by what these tools can do, then what's the next step beyond that? So I think that's what I would see one of the challenges going up to 100,000.
So we were talking about the Chipolization of education, modularization, which I'm behind. On the other hand, I'm having concerns, and this is what's going to sound grumpy and old. If you let me go into a restaurant and choose just what I want, I'm going to eat cheesecake. That's it. That's all I'm going to eat is cheesecake. Not good for me, but that's what I'm going to eat. So talk to me a little bit about when modularization good, when forced, or what might needed to be learned in tradition, et cetera, is necessary.
I've been waiting for an opportunity to comment about this in a way that didn't seem rude to previous panels. Because one of the things that came up in the previous panels is this idea of, something like a wiki-created course, a student-authored course. I have the exact concern that you just expressed about student-authored courses. And it's not like they choose things that are sort of deliberately known to be bad for them. I think one of the things that students ought to expect, and that certainly instructors are expected to provide, is an editorial voice, right? I have made certain judgments as a self-styled expert in some field about what to present, what order, what emphasis for each topic, et cetera, et cetera. And the students may not necessarily agree with my presentation, but I think part of my responsibility is to impose an editorial voice on that. Now, having said that, given that I know what my editorial voice is, it sure would be great if there were modules that I could use so that I didn't have to build every part of my curriculum from scratch. So I think there's a huge advantage for this, but just because it exists doesn't mean that that the right thing to do is to allow students complete free reign in choosing only the pieces they want. Or, to the extent they do, it's like we can't force people not to, for example, watch Fox News. It's not really news. They should read the New York Times, but they're going to do that anyway. Just the fact that choice is available doesn't mean that you can trust everybody to make the choice. So I have strong editorial views about that, and I'm glad you asked. I'll pay you later, too.
And I would say, as with everything we've talked about for all day today, I mean, everything in moderation, right? So you don't go 100%, it's not 100% modularization. You have to provide some sort of core learning. You do have to provide some sort of editorial service. If you can find an employer to hire you to eat cheesecake, then you would be okay. That's the other, you got some market forces out there. If employers are looking for people who know how to code, then you're going to, and you want to take pottery classes, well, that's fine, but you're not going to get a job. And eventually you're going to realize, if I want a job, I need to learn how to code. And so you're going to go and you're going to.
My known thing from a different angle. And maybe I'll sort of take the approach of a policymaker, taxpayer, et cetera. All right, so we've assembled an incredibly elite group of people, best and brightest. Open edX as a movement, a lot of the focus is on the MITs, the Harvards, the elite institutions, right? When is this stuff, so one conclusion that we might draw from this is we're trying to understand, learn, and optimizing learning for the elite, the students who go to these elite institutions. When is all this stuff going to the learning? How do we accelerate the learning about what's going on in the Open edX movement so that it reaches out to the middle of the bell curve, right? This is the community and technical colleges. And if we look at the history of MOOCs, schmoocs, whatever, it's a dismal failure, right? Udacity started off with this big thing, but when when it reached out to have learning for San Jose State community colleges, no effect. So my question is, how can we accelerate the learning that's going on in this group, this community, so that it reaches the accessibility is not about numbers, but the broad masses of people where we're struggling to educate?
I'll take a stab. So I think that several people have touched on it, but I'll just say again in a slightly different way. It isn't about, so a lot of people think it's just about enrollment. Yeah, just get them all in and then we'll just count that as success, right? We reached everybody in the sense of literally making it available to them at some remote outpost someplace, and therefore it's we can put a star on our badge and say we did our job. But I think one of the reasons why these issues and these themes keep coming up over and over again is that we actually are trying to solve the very problem that you're uncovering, which is that it's about engagement and figuring out what the right model of engagement is. And you can take small n or increasingly large n to figure out what the right model might be. Right? You don't need it to be hundreds of thousands of learners to figure out the model. And then you can make that model work across larger and larger domains. If you just put things out in a big MOOC and then expect everybody just to find each other and make happy communities happen, it's not going to work. But as people are exploring what the right size N is to make engagement happen, then I think we'll start to see the effect of expanding reach to everybody, but making the MOOC experience itself feel more intimate with the smaller size N that you really need to make engagement happen inside of that MOOC. So that's our goal, at least, is we introduce a couple of things that are starting to get at that, cohorts and teams and some other smaller concepts inside the MOOC. But the MOOC itself is open to everyone. And then you get yourself involved in one of the smaller groups and it starts to feel more like these experiences that we deliver today to more elite institution participants.
One way we could solve this problem is by thinking about the types of content that tend to be featured in MOOCs. Like, because MOOCs originated from higher education, obviously the types of content and courses are made for higher education level, but I think that if the end goal is to make learning more accessible to people around the world, like, one of the places that you need to start is by making content that is designed for adults, not designed for kids in high school, not designed for children, but that is, at a lower level, like for people who need to get their high school equivalency. Like, I'm always amazed that there isn't a really high quality, like, GED course available freely from an educational institution like this. Like, I think seeing more things like that is a first step, and I think that if the places like Harvard and MIT are the places who are going to be continuing to lead in this, and they want to democratize education, then they need to sort of start thinking about what content they're having available for this type of audience.
So I'm going to circle back to the MOOCs, but by way of what Katherine just said, to the modules, but by way of what Katherine just said. This will not come as a surprise to Beth. So I think one of the things that we missed in MOOCs, and missed in modules, and I'd sort of like to hear what you have to say about that, is that if you design your course from a modular perspective and you create it from a modular perspective, then you have your medium swim lane and you can duck down if you need to get some prep work, or you can slide over to something else. And I'd sort of like to hear what folks have to say about modularization at that level. So partly because getting away from the fact of, yes, you'd have to have some core requirements, which is, I think, what we were talking about before, but I'm more interested in how we could creatively use that modularization process to get to answering the question that you just asked.
So I just want to, so what you're describing is taking, say, a particular course and offering it the same content, but at different levels of rigor? Is that what you mean?
So the example I use is robotics. It's a very new field. It uses multiple areas of engineering. It usually comes in at the graduate level. So you need to have a strong basis in mathematics, a strong basis in mechanical engineering, a strong basis in electrical. Every person that comes in, they might come in as an electrical engineer or mechanical or a math major or physics major. They need to pick up the other, and computer science. They need to pick up the other disciplines. They can't go back and start taking all of the undergraduate pieces. It's not necessarily covered when you do that group thing together. So how do you pick up the gaps you need? So it's that. It's not, it really is exactly this. How do we bring in these other communities? Can we modularize in a way so that we bring in, or we make that information where they fall back more accessible?
We went from the 14-week course, MOOC course, that reflected the length of a course in a university, and we beat ourselves up horribly about the fact that nobody online wanted to finish them for some reason, because they really weren't aimed at exactly the kind of problem you're solving, or even really aimed at the kind of problem you just mentioned, which is, hey, I actually just need a GED first before I can get into, say, robotics. Got to start somewhere. And so one of the things that we've been talking about at edX, and this will be, and with OpenEdX community, a combined group of people, is how do you do that? How do you build up knowledge for people who are really starting from scratch? And maybe they're starting from scratch because they're coming back to education after a long time, or maybe they're starting from scratch because they never had access to education. For whatever reason, they're needing to rebuild or build from a low point, and not because they can't do it, but because they just haven't done it before. And so how do you do that in the context of MOOCs or small parts of MOOCs? And so we've introduced a couple of things that we still want to play with and experiment around: content, libraries of content, being able to be intermingled with a more structured, curated, instructor-led experience, which says, look, if you're taking robotics or some subdomain of that field, or any field, calculus-based physics is the example I like to use, and you can't remember parts of calculus, do I have to go take a MOOC on calculus? I hope not. It would be nice if I could just go and pop over there, do a little thing. Oh, right, I remember how related rates works now, and then come back and keep going. And so this is something that we're toying with now, trying to figure out how we can independently address content in whatever ways we need to. If a moment arises when somebody needs to access just that little piece of content, get it done just in time, and then go back into the flow and keep going with whatever topic that is, at whatever granularity makes sense. Right. So. That sounds like Khan Academy. It does, doesn't it? Yeah.